The silence in a restaurant like this was a constructed thing, a luxury item as carefully curated as the vintage wine chilling in silver buckets. For Jinwoo, silence was usually a weapon or a shield, but here it was merely an expensive, empty space. He sat alone at a table for two, a monolith of practiced stillness in a bespoke charcoal suit. His handsome face, a mask of serene indifference, betrayed nothing of the weariness that had settled deep in his bones. This blind date was a fiction, a necessary piece of theater. His men had arranged it and then arranged for the woman not to show, creating a plausible alibi for an evening he needed to spend being seen, but not engaged. Normalcy was the most difficult costume to wear. He ran an empire built on fear and shadow, yet he was required to occasionally sit under soft lighting and pretend to be waiting for a love he did not believe in. He let his gaze drift across the room, cataloging the other diners. The soft laughter, the clinking of glasses, the earnest conversations, it was all a language he could understand but no longer speak. And then he saw her. Across the room, a woman sat alone in a sea of couples, a solitary island of deep, resonant purple. Her dress was simple but elegant, and she wore it with a grace that seemed entirely unforced. She was beautiful, with skin that seemed to absorb the dim light, and features that held a quiet, captivating strength. She checked her watch, a small, discreet motion, but he saw the minute tightening of her lips, the subtle drop of her shoulders. It was a familiar specter, disappointment. He had seen it on the faces of his enemies, his allies, even in his own reflection. But on her, it looked different. It wasn't bitter or angry. It was a quiet, resigned sigh made visible. He found himself unable to look away. In his world, women were either assets or liabilities, decorations or dangers. This woman, however, seemed to exist outside his rigid dichotomies. She possessed a quality he had long since forgotten, a genuine, unguarded presence. She was simply there, waiting, and in her waiting, he saw a reflection of his own, a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight in his chest. His fortress of success, built brick by painstaking brick, had left him utterly alone inside its walls. He watched as she took a slow sip of water, her gaze drifting toward the window, at the city lights blurring in the darkness. He wondered what she was thinking, what life she lived beyond this failed appointment. For the first time in years, a flicker of genuine curiosity, a feeling untethered to profit or strategy, sparked within him. He watched this stranger in a purple dress and felt the unnerving sensation that he was the one who was truly on display. Allure smoothed the fabric of her purple dress, the motion a small, nervous comfort. The material was a splurge, a rare indulgence bought on a whim, a silent declaration that for one night, she was not just Leo's mom, the tireless provider and protector, but a woman named Allure. A woman on a date. Or what was supposed to be a date. She glanced at the delicate silver watch on her wrist, a gift from her mother from a lifetime ago. An hour. He was an hour late. A familiar ache, dull and predictable, settled in her chest. She had spent 2 days anticipating this, coordinating with the babysitter, painstakingly choosing her outfit, allowing a small, fragile bubble of hope to inflate within her. Now, the bubble had popped with a quiet, anticlimactic fizzle. She wasn't devastated. Life, and particularly her life as a single mother, had taught her resilience. Disappointment was a familiar guest, and she knew how to be a gracious host. Still, she felt the sting of it. The sting of the wasted effort, the sting of feeling foolish, of sitting alone while the restaurant hummed with the easy intimacy of couples around her. She felt a prickling on her neck, the distinct sensation of being watched. She lifted her head, her eyes scanning the room, and then they met his. Across the expanse of white tablecloths and flickering candles sat a man whose stillness was so absolute it seemed to bend the light around him. He was impossibly handsome, with sharp, intelligent features and dark eyes that held an unnerving depth. He was watching her not with pity or with the predatory appraisal she sometimes endured, but with a focused, analytical intensity that was something else entirely. It was the gaze of a man who missed nothing. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a mix of self-consciousness and a strange, unfamiliar flutter of intrigue. His world was clearly miles from her own. It was evident in the perfect cut of his suit, the expensive watch on his wrist, the almost reverential way the staff avoided his table. He looked like a man who commanded silence, who lived in a world of quiet, immense power. And yet, he was looking at her. For a moment, she forgot about her missing date, about the time, about the babysitter. There was just the silent, electric cord of connection stretching between their two lonely tables, a shared solitude that felt heavier and more meaningful than any conversation. She quickly looked down at her water glass, her heart beating a little faster than before. The waiter, a young man with kind but pitying eyes, began to approach her table. Allure saw him coming and braced herself for the gentle, professionally sympathetic inquiry. "Will your companion be joining you, madam?" The question felt like a small, sharp stone aimed at the fragile dignity she was trying to maintain. She prepared a calm, practiced smile and a polite refusal. But before the waiter could reach her, a shadow fell over her table. She looked up, startled. It was him, the man from across the room. He had moved with a silent, fluid grace that was almost startling, his presence instantly commanding the space around them. He stood there for a moment, not speaking, his dark eyes fixed on hers. The waiter froze, his professional instincts sensing a shift in the room's gravity. The man's stillness was not passive, it was charged with an unspoken authority. He gave the waiter a barely perceptible nod, a clear, silent dismissal. The young man retreated, without a word. Jin-woo turned his full attention back to Allure. An eternity seemed to pass in that silence. He was fighting a war within himself. Every rule he lived by, every instinct for self-preservation and control, screamed at him to return to his table, to let this moment pass, to remain a ghost. But the sight of her quiet resignation had broken through his armor in a way no threat or enemy ever had. He was acting on an impulse so foreign it felt like it belonged to another man, a man he might have been a long time ago. He finally broke the silence, his voice a low, smooth baritone, devoid of artifice. "It seems we are in the same predicament." It was a simple statement of fact, yet it felt like a profound confession. Allure stared up at him, her heart thumping against her ribs. She saw past the expensive suit and the intimidating aura. In his eyes, she saw the same echo of solitude that she felt in her own soul. A small, tired, but genuine smile touched her lips. She leaned forward slightly, her voice barely a whisper, a shared secret in the hushed elegance of the restaurant. "Your blind date didn't show up either?" The question hung in the air between them, an unexpected bridge built from mutual disappointment. He had expected surprise, perhaps suspicion or fear. He had not expected this. This gentle, knowing humor. This immediate, quiet understanding. For the first time that night, the mask of indifference on his face softened, replaced by a flicker of genuine, unfeigned surprise. Jin-woo felt the tension in his shoulders release, a loosening he hadn't realized was there. Her question, whispered with such simple, unadorned sincerity, had completely disarmed him. It wasn't an accusation or a judgment, just a quiet acknowledgement of their shared circumstance. He allowed himself a small, rare smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, but softened the hard lines of his mouth. "It would appear not," he replied, his voice still low. "May I? So that the evening is not a complete failure for either of us." He gestured to the empty chair opposite her. It was a risk, a breach of the anonymity he so carefully cultivated. But the thought of her leaving, of this fragile connection dissolving back into the silence of the city, was suddenly intolerable. Allure hesitated for only a second. Every sensible part of her brain, the part that listened to news reports and warned her son about strangers, told her to politely decline. This man was an enigma, a concentration of power and wealth that felt dangerous. But the mother in her was also an expert reader of character, of the truths that hide behind people's eyes. And in his, she saw not danger, but a profound and aching loneliness. She gave a small nod. Please, he slid into the chair with the same noiseless efficiency with which he did everything. The meal that followed was an exercise in restraint. The conversation was sparse, touching on safe, impersonal topics, the crispness of the wine, the surprising ambition of the chef, the understated jazz playing softly in the background. They did not exchange life stories. He did not ask what she did, and she did not ask about the source of his obvious wealth. Instead, they communicated in the spaces between words. Jin-woo found himself utterly captivated. He was accustomed to conversations that were strategic duels, every word a move on a chessboard. But with Allure, there was no game. She listened with an attentiveness that made him feel truly seen. She didn't try to impress him or pry information from him. Her presence was a balm, a quiet pool of stillness in the turbulent river of his life. For Allure, the dinner was surreal. She was acutely aware of the chasm between their lives. His watch probably cost more than her car. But as she watched him, she saw the subtle things. The way he treated the waiter with a quiet, formal respect. The way he never interrupted her when she spoke. He was a man of immense control, yet there was a gentleness in his restraint that she found compelling. The silence that fell between them wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable, shared quiet. It felt more intimate than any of the stilted, trying too hard conversations she'd endured on other dates. She could feel the unspoken burdens he carried, just as he could sense the deep well of strength and resilience within her. If you believe that sometimes the most meaningful connections are built in silence, take a moment to like and subscribe. They were two strangers from different worlds, united by nothing more than a failed appointment. Yet in that shared meal, they had found a rare and unexpected sanctuary. The end of the meal arrived as quietly as its beginning. Jin-woo settled the bill with a discreet gesture, a flash of a black card that made the transaction disappear without fuss. A comfortable quiet settled between them as they prepared to leave, the spell of their shared solitude beginning to break against the reality of the world outside. I should get home, Allure said, her voice soft. My son, Leo, will be waiting up for me. She spoke the name with an unconscious tenderness that reshaped her entire face, a love so pure and fierce it was palpable. The name, Leo, struck Jin-woo with the force of a physical blow. He kept his expression perfectly neutral, a lifetime of practice ensuring the shock didn't register on his face, but inside, a series of tumblers clicked into place. Le. He'd seen that name just last week. His organization, in its endless quest for a veneer of legitimacy, ran several charitable foundations. One of them, a passion project he personally oversaw but never visited, provided art scholarships for gifted children in underserved communities. He had been reviewing the latest round of candidates, his eyes scanning financial statements and teacher recommendations. He remembered one file in particular, a boy named Leo. The application had included a drawing, a vibrant, chaotic, and brilliant explosion of color depicting the city's skyline at night. The teacher's notes had praised the boy's prodigious talent and fierce imagination. And in the section for family background, it had mentioned his single mother, citing her unwavering dedication and sacrifice as the primary reason for the boys' success despite their difficult circumstances. It was her. The abstract words on the page had just become the warm, resilient, graceful woman sitting across from him. The world, which he always saw as a series of calculated moves and predictable outcomes, suddenly felt vast and mysterious. This wasn't a chance meeting. It was a convergence, a consequence of his own hidden actions coming to life before his eyes. A powerful, unfamiliar wave of protectiveness washed over him. This woman and her son were, in a small, indirect way, already under his care. He couldn't simply let her walk out into the night and vanish. The thought was unacceptable. As they stood, he spoke, his tone leaving no room for negotiation, yet managing to sound like a gentle request. Allow me to see you home. The city is unpredictable at this hour. Allure hesitated, her independence flaring. She was used to taking care of herself. But she looked into his eyes and saw no ulterior motive, only a sincere, unyielding concern. It felt safe. She nodded slowly. As they walked out of the warm light of the restaurant into the cool, dark embrace of the night, neither of them knew this was not an ending, but the quiet, unassuming beginning of everything. The ride to her apartment was a cocoon of profound silence. Jin-woo drove himself, having dismissed his driver for the night, an unprecedented break in protocol. The interior of the luxury sedan was a world of its own, smelling faintly of clean leather and the cool night air. The city slid past the windows in a blur of neon and shadow, but inside, the quiet was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. For Jin-woo, this silence was entirely new. It wasn't the empty, sterile silence of his penthouse, nor the tense, calculating silence of a business meeting. This was a shared silence, a space filled with Allura's gentle presence. He glanced at her, her profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. She was looking out the window, her expression thoughtful, serene. He felt a powerful, almost painful ache in his chest. It was the feeling of a long-dormant part of his soul stirring to life. His entire existence was a fortress, built to keep the world out and his vulnerabilities in. He had designed it to be impenetrable, but this woman, with her quiet dignity and knowing eyes, had simply walked through the gates as if they were never there. He thought of the file on his desk, of the drawing by the boy named Leo. He was this woman's anonymous benefactor, a hidden hand shaping a small part of her future. The knowledge was a heavy, precious secret. It connected him to her in a way she couldn't possibly understand, and it filled him with a fierce, primal need to protect her, to keep the ugliness of his world from ever touching the simple, beautiful life she had built for her son. He felt the immense weight of the juxtaposition, his hands, which signed orders that could end lives or topple enterprises, were now gripping the steering wheel of a car taking home a woman whose greatest treasure was a child's drawing. The absurdity and the profundity of it were almost too much to bear. Allura, for her part, felt a strange and wonderful sense of peace. The man beside her was an enigma, radiating a power that was both intimidating and, paradoxically, reassuring. She had spent years building her own fortress, a wall of self-reliance to protect herself and Leo. She was not used to letting anyone in, not used to accepting help, not used to feeling this safe. But sitting beside him in the quiet dark, she felt her defenses melting away. She didn't feel the need to fill the silence with chatter, to perform or explain herself. He seemed to understand the language of quiet as well as she did. She watched his hands on the wheel. They were strong, steady, and impeccably clean. They were the hands of a man who was in complete control, yet there was nothing aggressive in his stillness. It was a practiced, disciplined calm. She wondered what burdens those hands carried, what secrets were held behind those dark, watchful eyes. She found herself hoping this wasn't the end, that this single, shared evening wasn't just a beautiful, fleeting anomaly in her otherwise predictable life. The car finally slowed, pulling up in front of a modest, clean apartment building. It was a world away from the opulent restaurant, a world away from the man sitting beside her. For a moment, she felt a pang of self-consciousness, but it vanished as quickly as it came. This was her home. It was real. It was where she was raising her son. It was everything. He insisted on walking her to the door. The hallway of her building was quiet, the air smelling of old books and the faint, comforting aroma of someone's late-night cooking. It was a scent of life, of normalcy, so alien to Jin-woo's sterile existence that it felt like a foreign country. They stopped in front of her apartment door, number 3B. Taped to the wood, at a child's eye level, was a drawing, a crayon rendering of a smiling sun with a face, its rays a riot of orange and yellow. He recognized the style instantly. It was the same uninhibited joy, the same vibrant energy as the drawing in Leo's scholarship file. His heart clenched. This small, simple piece of paper was a more potent symbol of wealth than anything he owned. He turned to face her, the dim hallway light casting soft shadows on her face. The moment was charged, suspended between a beginning and an end. Words felt clumsy, inadequate. "Thank you," Allura said, her voice barely above a whisper. For the company. You saved my evening from being a complete disaster. Jin-woo looked at her, his gaze intense. He wanted to tell her that she had done more than save his evening. She had pierced a hole in the thick fog of his life and let in a ray of light. But such poetic truths were not his language. He settled for a simpler, more honest one. The pleasure was all mine. Allure, he said her name for the first time, and it felt right on his tongue. A small, electrifying current passed between them. A silent acknowledgement that this was more than just two people sharing a meal. He made no move to leave. She made no move to open her door. There was a pull, an invisible force holding them in place. Finally, with a small nod, he stepped back, the spell broken. Good night, he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the worn carpet. Allure leaned against her door, her breath catching in her throat. She listened until she could no longer hear his presence, then slowly unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was quiet. Leo was fast asleep, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. She walked to his room and watched him, overwhelmed by a wave of love and a new, terrifying hope. Down in his car, Jin-woo did not start the engine. He sat in the darkness, staring up at the window of apartment 3B. The fortress had been breached. He was no longer just an observer of her life. He was a participant, a secret guardian. He picked up his phone and made a call. The scholarship for Leo. From the art fund, he said, his voice low and firm. It's approved. Expedite it. And make sure the endowment is listed as completely anonymous. No foundation name, no trace. Is that understood? He hung up before hearing the confirmation. It was an act of kindness, yes, but it was also an act of penance for a life lived in the shadows. He wanted to give her son a piece of the light, a gift from a world she would, he hoped, never have to see. A week later, a thick, official-looking envelope arrived in the mail. Allure opened it with a sense of dread, her mind immediately jumping to overdue bills or bureaucratic red tape. But as she read the letter, her eyes widened, and she had to sit down on the edge of her sofa, the paper trembling in her hands. The letter was from the city's most prestigious youth arts program. It stated that an anonymous benefactor had established a full, multi-year scholarship and that after a review of promising young artists, her son, Leo, had been selected as the first recipient. It covered everything: tuition for advanced classes, art supplies, mentorship, even a fund for museum trips. It was a miracle. It was a lifeline she had never dared to pray for. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face. She hugged the letter to her chest, laughing and crying at the same time. The weight she had been carrying on her shoulders for years, the constant worry about nurturing Leo's incredible gift on her shoestring budget, had vanished. To celebrate, she took Leo to his favorite place in the world, the sprawling city park with the big fountain. As Leo sketched furiously in his notebook, capturing the way the sunlight hit the falling water, Allure sat on a nearby bench, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced since before he was born. And then she saw him. Jin-woo was standing near an old oak tree, watching them. He wasn't in a suit. He wore simple dark trousers and a soft gray cashmere sweater, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a thoughtful academic. He didn't look like he was there by accident. He looked like he was waiting. Her heart leaped. He started walking toward them, and a nervous flutter erupted in her stomach. I was in the neighborhood, he said, a simple explanation that explained nothing at all. His eyes, however, told a different story. They were fixed on Leo, who was now looking up at him with a child's open curiosity. Allure made the introduction. Leo, this is my friend, Mr. Jin-woo. Jin-woo crouched down so he was at Leo's level, a gesture of respect that touched Allure deeply. It's an honor to meet you, Leo, he said, his voice gentle. Your mother has told me nothing about you, but I feel like I am meeting a famous artist. Leo, usually shy with strangers, puffed out his chest a little. I'm not famous yet, he said seriously, but I will be. Jin-woo smiled, a real, unguarded smile this time. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows. I have no doubt. May I see? Leo proudly held up his sketchbook. Jinwoo studied the drawing of the fountain with sincere concentration. "You see the light, not just the water," he said quietly, more to himself than to the boy. "That is a rare gift." In that moment, watching this powerful, enigmatic man connect so gently and genuinely with her son, Allure felt her attraction to him deepen into something far more potent. It was a feeling of profound recognition, of seeing the true character of a man in a small, quiet act of kindness. The walls around her own heart didn't just melt, they ceased to exist entirely. Their meetings became a quiet, unstated routine. They never called them dates. There were no more fancy restaurants or grand gestures. Instead, Jinwoo began to enter her world, bit by bit. Sometimes, it was a walk through the park on a Saturday afternoon while Leo chased pigeons. Other times, it was a shared coffee at a small, unassuming cafe near her apartment, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and baked bread. Jinwoo, a man accustomed to having his every need anticipated by a legion of staff, learned to stand in line and order for himself. He listened as Allure spoke of her dreams for Leo, of the simple joys and crushing anxieties of being a single parent. He, in turn, remained a man of few words about his own life, yet he began to share small pieces of himself. He told her about the stray cat he'd fed as a boy, a secret kept from his stern, demanding father. He spoke of his love for old black-and-white films, for stories where honor and sacrifice meant something. Each small revelation was a precious stone offered from a sealed vault. He was learning her language, the language of quiet presence, of shared moments that needed no embellishment. For Allure, this was the truest form of romance. It wasn't about being swept off her feet. It was about being seen, truly and completely. He saw her strength, not just her beauty. He respected her independence, never once offering the kind of financial help that would make her feel like a charity case. Unaware, of course, of the grand, anonymous gesture he had already made. One crisp autumn evening, they sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, the very view Leo loved to draw. The air was cool, and the lights of the metropolis glittered below them like fallen stars. "I used to think success was about building walls," Jinwoo said suddenly, his voice a low murmur in the twilight. "The higher and thicker, the better. A fortress to protect you from the world." He paused, his gaze distant. "I never realized it was a prison. That I was the only one trapped inside." Allure listened, her heart aching for the loneliness he was describing. She didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. She simply reached out and placed her hand over his on the cold metal of the bench. It was a small, simple touch, but it was everything. His hand, which was usually held in a controlled fist or a gesture of command, slowly turned and intertwined his fingers with hers. He looked at their joined hands, as if seeing a miracle. Kindness, restraint, presence. These were the values she lived by, and he was beginning to understand that they were not signs of weakness, but the cornerstones of a strength far greater than any empire he could ever build. If you believe that true strength is found in gentleness, take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. His desire to protect her was slowly, profoundly, transforming into a desperate need to be a man worthy of her protection. The silence between them on the bench was no longer just comfortable. It was alive, filled with everything they had yet to say. The city sprawled before them, a universe of noise and hurry, but in their small bubble of quiet, the rest of the world faded away. Jinwoo looked from their intertwined hands to her face. The soft glow of the city lights illuminated the gentle curve of her cheek, the deep, soulful wisdom in her eyes. He had spent his life orchestrating outcomes, manipulating variables, and ensuring control. But with her, he had no strategy. He was simply, terrifyingly, himself. He had come to her world seeking an alibi, a momentary disguise of normalcy, and had instead found a truth so potent it had completely reordered his own. "When I sat in that restaurant," he began, his voice barely disturbing the air, "I was not waiting for anyone. My life is complicated." That evening was a performance, a necessary fiction. It was a confession, a risk. an offering of a piece of his shadowed truth. Allure simply tightened her grip on his hand, her gaze unwavering. She had known, on some intuitive level, that he was not a man who went on simple blind dates. She didn't need the details of his complications. She only needed the honesty she saw in his eyes right now. The silence in my life, he continued, struggling for the right words, it was always the sound of emptiness. The sound of being alone in a large, echoing room. But the silence is different with you, Allure. It's full. It's peaceful. He finally turned his body to face her fully, their knees almost touching. My life was a fortress. I see that now. And I don't know how you did it, but you walked in without a key. It was the most vulnerable he had ever been, the most honest declaration he was capable of making. It wasn't a flowery promise of love, but a raw admission of what she had come to mean to him. A tear slid down Allure's cheek, a single, silent drop of overwhelming emotion. She reached up with her free hand and gently touched his face, her thumb stroking his cheekbone. Maybe, she whispered, her voice thick with feeling, it's because my world doesn't have walls. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not passionate or demanding. It was a quiet confirmation, a tender and heartfelt sealing of an unspoken pact. It was a kiss of acceptance, of understanding, of two lonely souls finding a home in one another. It was a promise that even if their worlds remained miles apart, they could build a bridge of quiet, meaningful connection. They pulled back slowly, resting their foreheads together, breathing the same cool night air. The future was uncertain. His world was still dangerous, and hers was still fragile. But for the first time in a very long time, neither of them felt alone. They had found their sanctuary not in a place, but in a person. Thanks for listening to our story. We believe that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet presence that changes everything. What did you think of Jinwoo and Allure's journey? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational stories that touch the heart.